Welcome. My name's Kevin, and this is the Bible Artist Podcast. And today I'm joined by two guests, Dr. Todd Hains, who's an associate publisher for acquisitions and development at Lexham, and Natasha Kennedy, illustrator. She's also written some books. And today we'll be focusing specifically on the FatCat picture book series, which they've been working on for a couple of years now, I think. And it has several books now. Todd, Natasha, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us, Kevin. Hi.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
So before we kind of get into any detail, for anyone who hasn't come across your work before, who hasn't read FatCat, what's kind of the FatCat series about? Who are they for? Could you kind of give us a little bit of the premise?
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll start. It's sort of the editorial is where it began. The FatCat series came out of the anxiety of uncatechized folks in America. That's a big problem for Protestants in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And Lexham has always been interested sort of how to hand over, how to fish, not just to give people the answers, but teach them to read the Bible, to understand the Christian faith, to love God's word. Normally we just focus on adults, but for a long time we sort of had this interest in doing this with children as well, given the right circumstances. And so that's what FatCat was birthed out of, is that we were looking at, well, hey, how do we help kids with this stuff? And we realized that helping children understand the faith will help their parents as well. So it was sort of giving parents words to give to their children, and they're both learning together, both encountering questions. We're not giving all the answers to all the things, but the big picture stuff, and the big picture stuff that the Christian tradition has always focused on, in the West in particular. So the Apostles' Creed, the Ten Commandments, and the Lord's Prayer. These things together are the catechism. And that's how you find your way around. This is how you hear other Christians, and you're like, oh, yeah, we think the same stuff. I say those prayers, and I confess that same truth, and I hold myself to that same standard. And I will say why it's called FatCat is we realize that catechism is kind of a scary word. People are a little worried about that. And there's not really a great substitute for catechism. It's the great old Christian word. And so we wanted to bring it back. And so we came up with this way of hiding the cat throughout all of the books. So you can find this cat. And he is FatCat because he's fat. And then he's sort of this stand-in for the catechism. And there is sort of an homage to our own family's cats. I had a very fat cat named Earl, as in squirrel without SQ. I don't remember why we named him that, but that's why we named him. And he was enormously fat. And Tasha drew these early sketches of him. They were very funny. And then as we shifted over to this, she brought in some of her own beloved cats, these gray British short hairs, her cat Tut. And so that's kind of how you got FatCat, this gray cat, abnormally large. Oh, we have a fat cat here.
While we're talking about fat cats. I mean, he's not, his vet recently told us that he's only like maybe a pound overweight, but
overweight. Yeah. He's
we do sometimes joke about it. Yeah.
Is that Chomp? You remember that chart? The Chomp chart, I think it is.
Yeah.
No, I like it.
That's awesome though.
Yeah.
So just to kind of give a little bit more meat, like for someone who hasn't like picked up one of these books, like what is it like? What's the kind of the actual format of it? Like what's the approach of it?
Yeah. Tasha, do you want to say a little bit about that? Is that?
Yeah. The approach is we wanted to give kids and families just the basic words. So for example, with the Apostles' Creed book, we wanted to give them the words of the Apostles' Creed. So with each page, you're going to have some large text saying, maker of heaven and earth. And you can go through it only reading the big text and helping your kids memorize or get to know the Apostles' Creed or the Lord's Prayer, 10 Commandments, or some of the other books. And but then we also have some gloss text as well that have questions and thoughts for each section of the creed. This one was written by Ben Myers, who also wrote a book for adults on the Apostles' Creed. Really excellent. And so the family's kind of given, you're given the main text, but you're also given questions and thoughts that kind of help you chew on it and understand, and gives the family things to talk about and think about. And the other thing that every book has is actually a family prayer service in the back, that families can do together after they read the book. So that's kind of the physical layout.
Yeah, we were looking at trying to give this as a toolkit for a family that you can go through. And you can do this with Sunday school too, but each of these Ben's in the Apostles' Creed is a slightly different format, in part because Ben is a special writer, and in part because the Apostles' Creed is the most story-oriented of the 3 parts of the Catechism. And so he often will start with a question, and he's just pulling this one thread and wandering through. And I think a lot of these, if a parent actually sits down and sort of thinks about the Apostles' Creed, they've been to church a little bit, they're going to get they could probably get there, but there's some things that are extra tricky for just somebody who's maybe a little less schooled in the Christian tradition and faith. For example, the descent into hell. And so Ben's words are particularly helpful there. Children, you aren't immediately going to ask some of the things that we're worried about death or whatever. But when they do, it's very matter of fact. And so Ben is helping with that, in the descent into hell. Where do I go when I die? Well, wherever that is, that's where Jesus went. And he sort of walks through that. Then the Lord's Prayer and the 10 Commandments, the structure is different a little bit, where each one starts out with a confession, sort of like a prayer. Then it kind of is walking through, expositing a little bit, not too much. We didn't want to drain these things. The Lord's Prayer is especially tricky. We didn't want to make it feel like we're cutting up the prayer on some metal table and not putting it back together. We wanted to have a desire for prayer. And so it ends with a prayer as well. There are some, questions there that kids are going to have. And hopefully that the gloss text is helping people there. And Hal Sankbeil has years of catechetical experience as a pastor, 50 some years. And then in the 10 Commandments, the gloss there, that was really hard. How do you write a book about the 10 Commandments that parents want to read to their kids again? While still saying it reveals our sin. And it does. So what we did is we took a tip from an old Australian pastor who he said that when he teaches the 10 Commandments, he shows each commandment protects a gift. And so that's what it walks through, is it says, the Lord is my God. He has given me the gift of his name, worship, marriage, life, all these kinds of things. And sort of just walks through a little bit. And always in all of the books, sort of cycling between all of these, we were very careful about picking biblical passages to illustrate the words. With the Lord's Prayer and the 10 Commandments, that was fairly straightforward. Although the 10 Commandments, we didn't illustrate things from the Old Testament. All of them are illustrated from Jesus' life, because he is the fulfillment of the 10 Commandments. The Apostles' Creed was especially tricky. So some of those, we have very straightforward stories that we can use, but we really wanted to be careful, especially with depictions of the Father, that we're honoring the biblical testimony and not just making a bearded dude in the sky. So that there was probably the most angst about illustrating that book. It was also our first one. The others were a lot more straightforward. Yeah. So those are sorts of the pieces. You have the very words.
Hmm.
You can just read that as a parent. You have this gloss text that if you read the whole thing, it would be quite a long book, but you can just sort of focus on this one thing. Today, we're going to look at give us this day our daily bread. Today, we're going to look at do not murder. And then each one has, this illustration from the Bible. And then all of the books in the back have references there saying these are the Bible verses that were used to inform the art. So you can kind of keep expanding on with this. And then each one has a short family prayer that you could make shorter if you wanted, but it sort of gives you the bones to start building into your child's life. And a lot of this, I think some people, it might strike them as being a little above kids, but a lot of this is something that we're using we're doing something that Hal St. Giles, he says, when you buy your kids clothes, you buy clothes that are too big for them, clothes that they can grow into. And we do the same thing with the Christian faith. If we give a 4-year-old something that's immediately understandable to a 4-year-old, we're not serving this child very well. As the child grows, they'll immediately discard it because it's not quite true to life or whatever. So we just go to the Bible, and some of these words are too big, but God's word does what it says, interprets children. Children have faith because the word gives them faith by the Spirit. And so there are weird things that happen with the Bible passage. My own children are very fond of Psalm 130, out of the depths I cry. And they've been fond of it from an early age. And it's not something that I think they could just sit down and explain. I've gone on too long now.
No, there's a lot there that I want to unpack. Like you're anticipating some questions that I was wanting to, or like things I wanted to ask or point out about the book. But yeah, let me just say also, I've read a couple of the FatCat books with my own daughter, who's 4 years old. So Apostles' Creed and the Lord's Prayer, and she wanted me to tell you both that she loves FatCat.
Nice.
I think she's specifically talking about the cat in it, but I think she loves the books as well. We've tried using them kind of in kind of both ways. Like we've gone through like in a single sitting before, where she just wanted to go through like several of them. But we've also done it where we just like do like one section. We've done the kind of the prayer kind of liturgy thing before. And I like what you said about as I was like doing it with her, I definitely don't think that she's like getting, all the stuff that's there. But she's getting enough that she's like engaged with it. But I can definitely see that there's like room for her to kind of ruminate. And, as we read these books, as she gets older, I think that she'll be kind of discovering new things or seeing kind of new levels of what the text is saying. So,
well, and that's where with this stuff, it's not that you just read it once and you're done. I mean, normal books aren't that way, but the Bible and the Christian faith are especially that way.
Yep.
It keeps hitting you in new ways, and ways that, you're 40 years old and you're like, wow, how did I never notice that before? It seems so obvious to me now. And there's something about your own life circumstances that the Bible is drawing out. And the other piece, what I was thinking, what you're saying there with your daughter, that she's of course not getting all of it, but through the repetition and the pattern and the routine, she's going to get the big important pieces, not because of what we did or what you did, but because the content's going to do it, because it's God's words. And that made me think of a buddy. He talks about preaching, Sean McGeever. He talks about preaching, that he said it's like a meal. You don't remember every meal you've ever eaten. That doesn't mean that they're bad meals. But you've grown and you're nourished and you're healthy. So the meals worked. They did what they need to do. And sometimes I think that's a guilt that evangelicals feel, especially about reading the Bible. Oh, I didn't get very much out of my Bible time today, or for the last month. Well, it still is doing something. Just because you don't understand what's happening or you don't feel it, that's okay.
Yeah. And as far as like kind of how the text, at least on the two that I read with my daughter, it doesn't feel like the when you're saying like there's some stuff that they're not going to get, it doesn't feel like it's because like there's a lot of like kind of jargony words that are just like conceptually like far beyond them. I was a little more reminded of like the Gospel of John, where you have sometimes like very simple statements, but there's like a lot of depth like in that statement to kind of like process through or unpack. Like when Jesus says like, "I'm the light of the world" or something, that, those aren't like complicated words, but there's a lot to mull over and like meditate on.
Right.
And there are definitely sections of the book or the books where it's not necessarily that the words are complicated. It's just that there's like a lot of depth there.
Thank you for clarifying that. I mean, all the text, we took great pains to make as simple as possible. But it's the complexity that you see in the Ten Commandments, the Lord's Prayer, and the Apostles' Creed itself. Like you're saying, I believe in God the Father Almighty. A very simple sentence. But all of that you can spend your whole life thinking about. So no, that's,
and in that way, like I also felt like as an adult, like reading through with my daughter, like I can enjoy it, reading through a few times and like kind of mulling over. It seemed like there was a real attention to kind of having like certain like themes or like theological ideas kind of weave in. I saw that especially like in the kind of the Apostles' Creed one, where it felt like certain things like kind of like adoption and like union with Christ were kind of there were like kind of connective threads, and you got to see how those like biblical theological themes interact with or are kind of like present in kind of the different elements of the creed. So that was really cool.
The family piece that Ben wove in is really fun. He saw it as I think Romans 8 principally. He wasn't necessarily thinking about it beforehand. Ben is a very skilled writer who that is a strength and also a great challenge. So he wants to have perfect wording. So for example, what was it? The way that we did this is he actually sent this by Twitter direct message. Was how we would talk about the text, because otherwise it felt too formal and he got too much in his head about each word needing to do what it would do. So he kind of approached it as a fun thing with his years of thinking and mulling about it. And afterward it was fun that he's like, well, actually this is kind of Romans 8. So there was a specific phrase that I'm not going to think of now.
It's okay.
It's sons of something that he's like, can we put that in there? But which we did. We snuck it in. So
you also mentioned how kind of like, so each of these lines or each of the sections of the book is accompanied by kind of an illustration, which like sometimes it's kind of self-explanatory, like in the Apostles' Creed, like if it's talking about Jesus being raised from the dead, obviously, that's the scene that you're going to set it to. But then there are some, like you said, where like with the Father, like how do you depict that? Or like kind of abstract concepts like the forgiveness of sins, like what biblical scene do you put there? So I'm curious, what was kind of the process like in kind of figuring out what scene would work well with each line of the text?
I mean, it was very much a group effort, especially because we just wanted to go so carefully, which is why we chose to illustrate it through Jesus' life as much as possible, because if you're doing that, you're staying theologically sound, and yet we didn't want to just pull from New Testament scriptures. We wanted to be weaving in Old Testament passages, Psalms, prophecies. And so Todd, Lindsay, me, Todd's wife, and Ben, we kind of compiled, a list of scriptures to draw from. And then we would pick like which moment in Jesus' life best depicts this, and is it going to make sense to the reader why we picked it? So it was pretty complicated. But then at the same time, because we were limiting ourselves to Jesus' life, it made it a little bit easier to pick what to do. So we kind of brought in all the different passages, and we kind of had this sit down meeting in Bellingham, like, so should we do this story of Jesus' life with this part of the creed? Like, oh no, that would be better for the baptism spread, or that would be better for the, the church, the communion of saints spread. And so we kind of like mapped it all out. And then I did these rough gestures, kind of thumbnail gestures. We looked at them, we're like, okay, this looks good. And then I would start drawing. And actually it was kind of an interesting book as well, because Ben would often write the text after we would draw the picture, which none of the other books have been like that. But, as Todd said, he was kind of he had all this knowledge of the Apostles' Creed after studying it so much to write his book on it, that all we had to do was like show him a picture and he'd look and be like, oh, okay, and he'd write stuff down. So it's kind of a fun process. There was only a couple times where he said, no, I think we need a different picture for that. And so we had to kind of go back and change the artwork. But yeah, so it was kind of an interesting process. And I was always a little bit nervous as I'm drawing things, like, is this going to make sense? I think we have the Valley of Dry Bones for one of them. We're like, well, I don't know that every, Christian family is going to know what this is. And yet, this is why we put that kind of section in the back where we said, these are the scriptures we used for every page. If you're looking at this and thinking, what is this about? You can go back to the back and be like, read the passages together and be like, oh, this is the resurrection of the body is something that's talked about all over scripture. Okay. So.
Yeah. And this is a hard thing to talk about in a lot of ways, because the book, I think comes across fairly simply, but there's a lot of pieces in it and a lot of complexity that we were thinking through about how to present so that it didn't feel complex.
Yeah.
And yeah, we were very, we didn't want people to assume, oh, this is the passage that they're thinking of with God the Father. I would like to think that most people would be like, oh, it's the heavenly throne room, Ezekiel 1 stuff. And I would like to think that, but we also wrote these for people. I know a lot of folks at this stage of life where they have children and they haven't really been involved in church, and now they're coming back. And so it's, how do you do this so that you're not shaming or feel like you're shaming as parents? That it's okay if you don't know all the stuff. That's all right. These books are going to help you. They're not going to make you feel bad, and you're going to find new depths as you keep going with it. There's still some weird Easter eggs hidden, like in the end sheets. We have the Lord is there in Hebrew from Ezekiel. But yeah, the first book in particular was tricky because we didn't have the text beforehand. So there's things that we learned later that it's always nice to have the text beforehand. Yeah. And then you really do want it, as Ben put it, you almost want to pick stereotypical Bible passages so that people can just kind of glance at them and recognize them. So there's some deep cuts, like in the Lord's Prayer, the Pentecost scene from John is in there. It works very well, but again, that might have been a little bit of a deep cut in a certain sense, but it works so well. And yeah, I hope that people can still get past some of that stuff, or that it's a thing that opens them up.
Yeah, no, I definitely found all of the choices really interesting. And yeah, that's part of kind of the meditative quality of it. Like as you're reading the text, the process of looking at the picture and then being like, okay, what story is this? And then you're putting it together in your head. Okay, this is the story and this is how it connects to the text. That process is part of what makes it engaging and part of what allows you to kind of come to kind of deeper understanding. So I really liked that approach. Natasha, I'm curious, when it came to actually putting together some of the illustrations and the pictures, what was the kind of the inspiration process or I'm curious, were you kind of like just focused on the biblical text, or were you looking at like kind of historical depictions of some of these events, or what kind of went into that for you?
Yeah, it was a really fun process, kind of pulling together a vision for these books. Because I studied theology, but I also liked art, but I also like historical church artwork. And so, yeah, it was kind of this blend in terms of style. It was kind of a blend of we wanted the reverence and we wanted to have some influence of church tradition, so really looked a lot of Byzantine iconography, and their placements, and the descent to hell spread is literally pulled from an icon of Jesus pulling up Adam and Eve out of Hades. And so we wanted the artwork to feel very like to feel classic, to feel timeless. And at the same time, we wanted it to be playful and colorful and something that's going to draw in a kid. So as an artist, I'm heavily influenced by my favorite painter, Ivan Earl. And I mentioned when we were first discussing ideas, I mentioned to Todd, like, yeah, there's this artist that I think would be cool if we kind of pulled from his style. Showed Todd pictures of his work, and Todd is like, yes. he's the Disney artist who did all the backgrounds for the Sleeping Beauty movie. So if you ever go, first of all, the designs of the people are just really unique. And so you can see a lot of that with my people, just very angular faces and kind of like long, kind of geometric bodies. And but then his backgrounds, if you just watch Sleeping Beauty and only look at the backgrounds, you're going to be blown away. And so we really liked what he did, because this movie looks so timeless, so beautiful, and yet it was kids loved it. And the other thing that I always try to like keep my eye on is I just absolutely loved the Beginner's Bible as a kid. And even as a kid, I thought it was really dorky. As an adult, I still think it's really dorky. And yet I'm like, no, that's totally the Bible I'm getting for my kids, because there's something about it that grips like all of my kids love it. My 11-year-old still reads it just cover to cover, just every once in a while, because she just likes it. It's just telling you the simple story of that Bible passage. Nothing more, no elaborate text. It's just, here's the story, here's a picture of, Abraham looking surprised. And that's all a kid really needs, is like, boom, there he is with his big eyes. And so they're kind of trying to pull all that together and be like, I want it to be fun. I want it to be like Todd. I love Richard Scarry as well, but Todd especially was telling me, like, I wanted to feel like looking at a Richard Scarry book where there's just so much going on the page. It's like, over here there's a car crash and there's bananas everywhere, and then over there's a donut disaster, and
always pies.
Something's
gone wrong.
Yeah, so so every time I turn in a spread of artwork, Todd's like, more, just add more, just of anything. Because part of me wants to go like, oh, very simple, very like, all we really need is Jesus and this person. He's like, no, we need tons of people on this page. Which is great, because it lets the kid spend time on the page, which is kind of what you want from having a book where there is that reflective gloss. While the parent is reading it, the kid has so many different things to look at. I focus a lot on people's expressions. So you have Jesus, you drawing a line in the sand, forgiving Mary, and then all the different people's faces as they're walking away, looking either disappointed or confused or humbled. you can just suddenly stop and think about, wow, what must it have been like to be one of those people just getting told off or whatever.
It's actually my daughter's favorite page.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's so cool.
she likes to go back to that one. Yeah.
That's so cool. And even that has I had a lot of like artistic elements that were really fun. The warmer colors drawing your eye and the colder colors making it almost seem like they were in this outer darkness almost. Yeah. And then lastly, of course, just hiding FatCat on a spread is like any kid, any adult is gonna want to find him. There was this one Amazon review I read recently. It was like 1-star review for a FatCat book. And this person is saying all the theological things they had a problem with. And then they said, I guess the one good thing was that my kid really liked it and they liked finding the cat. Like, I'll take it.
Yeah. I feel like that's worth more than 1 star, but
Right.
but my daughter, like, yeah, the first time we went through it, like, it didn't take long for her to like be wanting to like, get to the next page to find the FatCat. It's such like a fun, like, playful element to it. I'm curious, like, was it ever difficult to like kind of try to balance kind of the whimsy of FatCat with like kind of the emotional weight of some of the scenes that you were depicting?
Yes, absolutely. I'm like curious why Todd's laughing, because there's definitely times where I draw something Todd's like, Tasha, you can't do that. You can't.
It's very funny, but
like in the Descent to Hell spread, I originally had it. There's like this kind of crack in hell going down into darkness, and FatCat's like falling into it, like claws are like there's like claw marks as he's like about to fall out, and he looks so frightened. And Todd's like, you can't do this. And like with I have this this is the baby board book that is coming out next month. And it's got, I mean, it'll be the only baby board book you can find that has the crucifixion in it. But because this is our faith. But originally, in this book, we've got just lots of animals. And, because it's for babies. And so some of the animals join along. Some of them are, there's more and more and more the resurrection, there's just so many animals. But in the crucifixion spread, I sent it to Todd, and he's like, it just looks, it's a bit too silly and playful for the crucifixion. Like, we cannot do that. And so I had to go back. I got rid of some animals. We're changing expressions, and because we want that page to be solemn and serious always. Crucifixions in every single FatCat book. And every time we were like, okay, almost every time FatCat is either he's like turned away, like looking up at the cross, and he's kind of a silhouette, or he's looking mournful. So yeah, we try to have him matching the mood of the page.
Yeah, no, I definitely felt like in the ones that we read through, and in some ways, like, it's cool, like, she's drawn to look at FatCat on that page, but then he kind of models for her kind of the emotional, like, response to what's going on. So far from like kind of undercutting it, like it's a way that you actually seem to kind of enhance what's happening.
Redirects the child back towards Jesus and towards what the page is about.
And the core three, the Apostles' Creed, the Ten Commandments, the Lord's Prayer, I think that's especially the case. And then I think with the Easter and Christmas, we had to hide FatCat. So that one, sometimes there are just a couple that are maybe a little bit sillier, but it fits those books in a way that book opens up possibilities, because Christmas is, where do we find Jesus? Easter is, what does Jesus do when he finds us? So
Mm.
there's a little bit more playfulness that's allowed there, even though those, all of those, also we were trying to depict biblical things.
Yeah.
But with the core three, that was a line that we were very conscious of. To not like the fat cat falling. That was the one that I was thinking, Natasha.
Yeah. I do think the one that I don't know how we got away with is the Valley of Dry Bones. Fat Cat's just a skeleton.
I like that one a lot. Yeah.
He's on the resurrection spread though. He's in the everlasting life spread though. So
yeah. Yeah, that one's really fun. Yeah. And children love it. It's fun to see the questions that children have about Fat Cat. We probably should make a list sometime. There was people were like, "Oh, is Fat Cat Jesus Cat? Where does Fat Cat sleep at night?" Yeah. We were thinking about compiling enough of those if there was like a mini story from it.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah. Questions.
So I guess taking a step back and just kind of talking more broadly. So, my podcast, I try to kind of promote the value of biblical art, whether it's, a picture book or a TV show or kind of a more traditional painting, how these things can help us to engage with biblical stories and see the beauty that's already there. I'm curious just to hear from both of you what you think, like why you think kind of illustration and storytelling in the arts, why it's like important for Christians and for the church.
I feel like my number one answer to that would be that kids really connect with art, and they connect with visuals and emotions. And our faith is a person. Our faith is someone who became one of us and walked among us and became familiar to us. And something that I feel like when we make art that interacts with this, it's giving kids an opportunity to interact with this living faith, the faith that revolves around a person. And obviously, we're not saying this art is the person. I like to think about it as how God made us image bearers. And one of the things that it means to be an image bearer is to be mini creators. And he gave us this world so that we could mimic him by making our own little versions, our own little creations. And so he's given us this great story. And when we interact with it and kind of make our own beauty and art out of it, yes, it's flawed. It's flawed every time. But that's us being like our Father. That's us saying, wow, look at this amazing thing you gave me. Here's what I'm going to do with it myself. And here's putting my own passion and what I see into it. And if it's staying in its lane and playing its correct role, what it's doing is it's redirecting our affection and our inspiration and our excitement towards the true living person. I honestly don't think there's a single person who, falls in love with the artwork rather than the true God. I mean, maybe it's happened before, but I think that what I see happening with my kids as they watch me making the art for this, I'll do artwork on my iPad and I'll screen mirror it onto the TV, and the kids will just sit there watching it get drawn, and they're like, "Where are you going to hide Fat Cat? Maybe see." And they're making all suggestions about where I should put it, which I have taken many of their suggestions. But they start getting just so inspired about these Bible passages and reading the Bible. And my 11-year-old's been telling me, she's like, I want to write some books for the other kids on our street about kids going into Bible stories and meeting people. And I'm just like, yes, that is her interacting with her faith creatively and making it her own. And in so doing, like, she's connecting with who Jesus is.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely way of putting it all. And art it's something that all of us can connect with. And especially in these books, you see the pre-literate, a child that they're not necessarily literate, but they can read the images, and so they can
Mhm.
guess what the words are. It can help build them that way. Where if we're asking them to shut off their eyes, that they can't see some of these things, it just makes it so difficult. How will then these things become abstractions? They're not personal. They're not concrete. And that's what art is really great at: is making things personal, making them concrete, externalizing us. We're turned outside. We're not just, well, this is how I see this inside my head. Something happens when we do this outside of ourselves. And that's really important. The other thing that I think art does with the Bible is these stories are alive. These aren't dead stories. They're not done. They are history, but they're not mere history. These stories somehow interpret us and show us, this is what my day is like. This is what my life is like. And so art helps us to see that. These stories are our stories. We're placed inside of them. And so it's appropriate to imagine that in all sorts of fun ways, whether it's Caravaggio depicting the temple police as medieval knights. Yeah, it's anachronistic, but it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's so cool. Or you can pick any culture. When you look at their nativity sets, and they depict Jesus in their culture, and that's beautiful. And of course, Jesus is a man in a specific time, in a specific place, specific culture. And there's a place for doing all of that. And it's so fun to me that every culture, when Christianity comes to it, they're like, oh yeah, we're going to figure out how Jesus is in our culture.
Mhm.
It's There's something beautiful about that, because if all the nations are made from one man, made from one blood, this is where we come from. Somehow, Jesus holds in himself all people.
Mhm. Yeah. And I like what you said, Todd, about how pre-literate children can interact with it. And I think, taking that a step further, it really like crosses the language barrier where any person can look at a piece of artwork. I could go worship at a church in Ukraine, and maybe I don't understand a word of the service. This did happen, but I remember just being so moved by the artwork. And yeah, that's really important. It's really important that you can say so much with just a single picture. Anything, this is something I've realized whenever I draw pictures, just anything I draw, whether it's positioning someone's hands or the slight expression on their face, like it says something. I mean, there's so many times where I'll draw something and Todd's like, "Sorry, Tasha, that picture to me looks like this person is mad, or it looks like Jesus is being kind of flippant." And I'm like, "Really?" And then I'll like change like the tiniest little pixel, and Todd's like, "That's great." So it's like, yeah, it's pretty powerful.
That's where those images they cross words, and they help us to see, oh, it is one faith, one baptism, one Lord. And these images themselves aren't things that we're worshiping. Like, don't think anybody's taking that away. It's just helping children hear this story. I think this is also where with picture books, we don't realize how much is happening at once. So like if you ever pitch a kid's book to someone without words and you just show them the pictures, they're like, well, I don't know how people are going to understand this. If you just give them the text, they'll almost always be like, well, I think it's too complicated. And there's this really crazy magical thing that happens when you put the two together, that they're mutually interpreting. They slow down both the adult and the child. And there's so much that's where this is a weird thing to explain, like what a kid's book is.
Yeah.
But the other art bit that I think of is Joseph Ratzinger had said that the two great defenses of the church are the lives of her saints and her art. And so the art is important because our faith is true, good, and beautiful. And so we should make beautiful things. We should make good things. And none of those are good or beautiful if they're not true. So there's subjectivism here, but it all comes back to the objectivity of the word. That there are lines that you cannot cross. But it's this big fenced-in field, and there's a lot to play with, a lot of fun.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Yeah, I'm gonna want to listen back through and a lot of beautiful things there on kind of the importance of art, and Natasha, some of the kind of your initial answer about kind of just the way that God made us as creators, just resonates with me a lot. So, thank you both so much for all that you've shared. Before we kind of close down, I know that you mentioned that there's a new board book that is either just came out or it's coming out kind of in the next couple weeks. And then I think, Natasha, on your site, I saw that maybe you're working on a morning and evening prayer FatCat book. So do you want to share about any of those or other things that that are coming down the pipe?
Yeah, the board book is coming out next month, right, Todd?
September 18th, I think it is, something like that.
Yeah. Okay, so that's really simple text, really with a really cute poem. The text is just at the bottom. Poem by Todd, and so that one I'm actually really excited about. I road tested it on my 2-year-old. She's 3 now, but when I was doing this artwork, I'd show her the page and see what she would say, and which characters she loves. The elephant. There's an elephant in there, which is from that old from Luke 2, the elephant that came to Jesus' birth. No, I'm just kidding. Bad joke. And then the morning evening prayer book. Really excited about. It's maybe the hardest FatCat project we've done for me, probably because so what it is I mean, maybe I should have Todd explain the flip book aspect. It's really exciting, but it's giving a family a morning prayer and an evening prayer, and it's the first book we've done in modern day. And so it's following 2 different families, one in the East, Korea, and one in the West, kind of Midwest, Montana-ish area. And it was really hard to not be just drawing from Jesus' life. Like that was such a simple something that I kind of live by as an artist, is that limitations are very helpful and they breed creativity. And with this, it was almost like there were so many options. And I was like, gosh, what do I do? So that was hard. But Todd, you should explain the flip book.
Yeah. So it's just 2 simple prayers, a single morning prayer. It's kind of like the Collect for Grace for those in the Anglican tradition, which you also see in Lutheran prayers, but it is adapted from what Luther does in the Small Catechism. So Luther flipped it into an evening prayer as well. So in the morning, you say, "You've graciously kept us through the night, safe from all harm and danger. Keep us this day from all sin and evil." And then at the end is Psalm 31, commending us and our bodies and souls into God's hands. The evening prayer flips it. Kept us this day and forgive us our sin and keep us this night. And then again, Psalm 31. So originally we were kind of thinking, maybe we do 2 separate books, but the prayers are so close that it's kind of, I don't know, like you're taking advantage of the reader. So I had memory of this series of books as a kid where they were flip books. They're tete bêche is the technical term. So I'll hold it up. It's like this. I'm bad at the camera. It's like this, and then if I turn it around, you're like, oh, it's upside down. So if you flip it this way, then it's the right side up. So halfway through, the two books would meet. Strangely, when people do this, often the middle pages are blank. I don't know why they do that, but I remember as a kid just being like, oh, this is so weird. One side's upside down, one side's not. And sometimes they have nothing to do with one another. In this, you really wanted to have that unity, that a pre-literate child also is able to say, oh, here's the morning. I can't read any of these words, but I know it's morning. Here's the evening. I can't read these words, but I know at the evening. They can kind of find their way through it. And then in the center, these two families, this family from Korea and this family from sort of the Rockies, the foothills there of the Rockies, they meet in the middle. And they say Psalm 121 together. So yeah, and it was much more difficult just for the reasons that Tasha's saying. Everything is subjective. You could do whatever you wanted. And so it became more difficult to negotiate sort of what makes sense for the reader. The text is a prayer over the image. It's not necessarily that the image is explaining. It's just you're following these folks get ready for going on to their day or for going to sleep. And you're just letting these words wash over them. So, and the idea there is you're just giving children, here's a small prayer that you can have for the rest of your life to order your days, to help you see, what does a good day mean? What does a bad day mean? How is it true even when it doesn't feel like it's true? These kinds of things. We should walk through, I guess, all of the book. That, I think, is the 7th FatCat. So there's the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, and the 10 Commandments. These are the core 3 catechism ones. The King of Christmas, which is FatCat and the Magi going and looking for where do you find Jesus. And it keeps going beyond the manger, because in the Gospel of Matthew, the only people that call Jesus the King of the Jews, we didn't use that term, but the only people that call him the King of the Jews are Herod and then Pontius Pilate and his soldiers. And so there is something that when Herod says when the Magi says that to Herod, you should be making a connection. Oh, this baby's going to die. So it keeps going on to the resurrection, and then where do we find Jesus? And Easter, King of Easter, flips that story, where Jesus and FatCat, they go and they find people from the biblical story. And they might not seem like things are so bad in their life, but Jesus somehow came to seek and to save them. And some of them seem much too bad. Saul is essentially, Saul would have said that he was killing Christians. He's handing them over. But even he is saved. In both of those books, the text is much more simple, just a line or so, repetitive. And in the King of Christmas, somebody's joining from each image. So this is a lot of work for Tasha. That at the end, there are a lot of people. They're all there together. And then the board book, Who is Our King? Which the conceit there is we just thought, there are all these animals. Isn't it fun to think Jesus is in the street somewhere and there's a dog? Oh, there's the Lord our God that made us. You think he'll scratch my ears? And so it's just walking through a very simple text. Jesus, this man, is your God. But saying it, very simply. And then this last one is morning prayer, evening prayer. So we'll see what we can do. And morning prayer, evening prayer, the title's slightly different. It's keep us this day, keep us this night. So we'll see what we can do next. We have ideas, but
Oh, well, that's awesome. I'm really excited for that, especially that morning prayer and evening prayer one. That sounds like a really beautiful resource to kind of cultivate a sense of kind of trusting God with each day. So, well, thank you both so much for taking the time to talk and share about FatCat and share about kind of all that has gone into it. It really is. The books feel like, kind of the proverbial duck on the waters where, it looks still on top, simple on top, but I can tell that there's been a lot of like paddling underneath to create that kind of calmness and tranquility to the books. So, thank you so much for joining us and sharing.
Thank you, Kevin. It was really fun.
And thanks everyone for listening to the Bible Artist Podcast. Godspeed.